Miracles of Mark. Miracles of Yahushua according to Webster's New World Dictionary are events or actions that contradict known scientific laws. 3 times Yahushua raised the dead. He gave sight to the blind, healed leprosy, deafness, paralysis, fever, withered limbs, and amputated ear, muteness, and hemorrhaging. And one time he healed all that were brought to him, and yet according to his disciple Talmudian priest John, only a small number of the things he did were recorded. Yochanan, John 21, verse 25. Perhaps you witnessed someone being healed by prayer, or whose life was changed by his or her commitment to Messiah. If so, you have seen Yahushua at work in the 21st century. Miracles in Mark. Yahushua heals a deaf mute. Mark 7, verse 31 through 37. Blind man healed. Yahushua drives out an impure spirit. Peter's mother-in-law healed. Many healed after sunset. Yahushua cleanses a leper. Yahushua forgives and heals a paralytic. Healing on the Sabbath. Wind and wave obey Yahushua. A demon-possessed man healed. Who touched my clothes? Woman with issue of blood healed. A girl restored to life and a woman healed. Yahushua feeds 5,000. Yahushua walks on the sea. Many touch Yahushua and are made well. A Gentile shows her faith in Yahushua. Feeding the 4,000. A blind man healed at Bethesda. A boy is healed. Yahushua heals blind Bartimaeus. The fig tree withered. Yahushua heals a deaf mute. In Mark 7, verse 31 through 37, again departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one. But the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear, and the mute to speak. Blind man healed. Mark 8, verse 22 through 26. Then he came to Bethesda, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, Neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. Yahushua drives out an impure spirit. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Yahushua went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then, a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, What do you want with us? Yahushua of Nazareth, have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of Elohim. Be quiet, said Yahushua sternly. Come out of him. The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, What is this? A new teacher? With authority. He even gives order to impure spirits, and they obey him. Mark 1, verses 21 through 27. Peter's mother-in-law healed. Mark 1, verse 29 through 31. Now as soon as they had come out of the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. But Simon's wife's mother lay sick with a fever, and they told him about her at once. So he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. And immediately the fever left her, and she served them. Mark 1, verses 29 through 31. Many healed after Sabbath. Many healed after sunset. Mark 1, verse 32 through 34. At evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. Then he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he did not allow the demons to speak, because they knew him. Mark 1, verses 32 through 34. Yahushua cleanses a leper. Now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him and saying to him, If you are willing, you can make me clean. Then Yahushua, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I am willing. Be cleansed. As soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. And he strictly warned him and sent him away at once, and said to him, See that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing those things which Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. However, he went out and began to proclaim it freely, and to spread the matter, so that Yahushua could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places. And they came to him from every direction. Mark 1, verse 40 through 45. Yahushua forgives and heals a paralytic. And again he entered Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Immediately many gathered together, so that there was no longer room to receive them, not even near the door, and he preached the word to them. Then they came to him, bringing a paralytic who was carried by 4 men. And when they could not come near him because of the crowd, they uncovered the roof where he was. So when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was lying. When Yahushua saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, Son, your sins are forgiven you. And some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, Why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but Elohim alone? But immediately when Yahushua perceived in his spirit that they reasoned thus within themselves, he said to them, Why do you reason about these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, Your sins are forgiven you, or to say, Arise, take up your bed and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, I say to you, Arise, take up your bed and go to your house. Immediately he arose, took up the bed, and went out in the presence of them all, so that all were amazed and glorified Elohim, saying, We never saw anything like this. Mark 2, verses 1 through 12. Healing on the Sabbath. And he entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a withered hand. So they watched him closely, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, Step forward. Then he said to them, Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they kept silent. And when he had looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and immediately plotted with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Mark 3, verses 1 through 6. Wind and wave obeyed Yahushua. On the same day when evening was come, he said to them, Let us cross over to the other side. Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along on the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. It was as calm as the storm was just making so much sound. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him? A demon-possessed man healed. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Yahushua from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with you, Yahushua, Son of the Most High Elohim? I implore you by Elohim that you do not torment me. For he said to him, come out of the man, unclean spirit. Then he asked him, what is your name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. Also he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, send us to the swine that we may enter them. And at once Yahushua gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. Mark 5, verses 1 through 23. Who touched my clothes? Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Yahushua, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. Let me pause here and just say this. She did not have to go anywhere to look to see if her fountain of blood had really dried up. She knew intuitively. She knew by the Spirit of our Father that she was healed. And Yahushua, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? So now this speaks to my heart that virtue went out of him, and he could feel that virtue, which he knew. He knew, just like you and I know, when he quickened us and bring forth healing or strength through words and encouragement, we can feel him, his spirit moving and going out and touching, the word touching, because the word is spirit and it is life. But his disciples said to him, you see the multitude thronging you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. That's in Mark 5, verses 25 through 34. Now you see, when we go to the physician, doesn't the physician touch us? Then we feel his physical touch, or the nurse taking our blood pressure and checking our heartbeats and everything. So there is contact there, physical contact. But here is spiritual contact. And it is just as powerful if we are tuned into it. Most of us are tuned into physical contact. And after the doctor examine and say what's happening to us, and then gives us medication, so then we have to go to the drugstore to fill the prescription, and then by faith, after going through all of that, then by faith we take our medicine and then we wait. But here, this was instantaneously. She didn't have to get in the car to drive anywhere. She didn't have to make an appointment. She just got up by faith and pushed herself through. She didn't call to the nurse to set up an appointment. What is the best time? Because she already knew this was her time had come. So maybe some of you are like that. So pay attention to these miracles and these different gospels of good news. All right. The other one is a girl restored to life and a woman healed. Now when Yahushua had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Yairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live. So Yahushua went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, who said, Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? As soon as Yahushua heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, Do not be afraid, only believe. And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him and entered where the child was lying. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha Kuma, which is translated, Little girl, I say to you, arise. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. Mark 5, verses 21 through 24 and 35 through 43. Yahushua feeds 5,000. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Yahushua, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. But he answered and said to them, You give them something to eat. And they said to him, Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? But he said to them, How many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks and hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. Mark 6, verses 33 through 44. Yahushua walks on the sea. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Webster, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straining and rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, "Be of good cheer, it is I. Do not be afraid." Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased. And they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. Mark 6, verse 45 through 52. Many touch him and are made well. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran through that whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. Mark 6, verse 53 through 56. A Gentile shows her faith. From where he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Yahushua said to her, "Let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." And she answered and said to him, "Yes, Master, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For this saying, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter." And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed. Mark 7, verse 24 through 30. Yahushua heals a deaf mute. Again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came to the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech. And they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then, looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, be open. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one. But the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, "He has done all things well." He makes both the deaf to hear and mute to speak. Mark 7, verse 31 through 37. Feeding the 4,000. In those days The multitude being very great, and having nothing to eat, Yahushua called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way, for some of them have come from afar. Then his disciples answered him, How can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? And they said 7. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before them, and they set them before the multitude. They also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. Immediately got into the boat with his disciples, and came to the region of Dalmanutha. Mark 8, verses 1 through 10. A blind man healed at Bethsaida. Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, Neither go into the town, nor tell anyone in the town. Mark 8, verse 22 through 26. A boy is healed. And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to him, greeted him. And he asked the scribes, What are you discussing with them? Then one of the crowd answered and said, Teacher, I brought you my son, who has a mute spirit. And wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not. He answered and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. Then they brought him to him. And when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, How long has this been happening to him? And he said, From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Yahushua said to him, If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Master, I believe. Help my unbelief. When Yahushua saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more. Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, He is dead. But Yahushua took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Mark 9, verse 14 through 27. Yahushua heals blind Bartimaeus. Now they came to Jericho. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, Blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. And when he heard that it was Yahushua of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Yahushua, son of David, have mercy on me. Then many warned him to be quiet, but he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So Yahushua stood still and commanded him to be called. Then they called the blind man, saying to him, Be of good cheer, rise, he is calling you. And throwing aside his garment, he arose and came to Yahushua. So Yahushua answered and said to him, What do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. Then Yahushua said to him, Go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed Yahushua on the road. Mark 10, verses 46 through 52. The fig tree withered. Now the next day, when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing them from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. In response, Yahushua said to it, Let no one eat fruit from you ever again. And his disciples heard it. Mark 11, verse 12 through 14. And I want to make a point here. I have fig trees myself. And it surely is true that when the leaves come out, there are the figs. They show up too. So you get to see leaves and fruit. So I do know. And it's confirmed with my own eyes that this is so. And a miracle certainly take place, because here it is explained that it was not the season for figs, and that's why the figs did not take place. Try to remember that there was quite a number of miracles in the book of Mark. If you are looking for a miracle, let this book inspire and encourage you to know that if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, that you can say to the mountain, Be thou removed and be cast in the sea, or you can receive your healing through belief, through faith. And if you don't have enough, you feel, you can always pray like the man did that came on behalf of his son. Ask Messiah, help thou my unbelief. And I touch and agree for your healing or whatever miracle you're desiring to take place in your life. We give you praise and thank you, Father, for the miracles found in the book of Mark. Hallelujah.